Hey everybody, welcome to Irish Sports Daily YouTube Live. We're here, Jamie and Greg, Hidden Hustle. This one time we're doing a live show. Going to be talking about just everything that's been going on in fighting Irish football right now, right? So a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff still that we're kind of waiting on. But first, kind of thought we'd go into the coaching changes and what has happened so far. So, Greg and I, we already talked about the Harry Heastam move, and that was on a previous show. But, a lot has happened since then. Let's start first with Chauncey Stuckey in the wide receiver position. Not a lot of experience, 1 year full-time at Baylor. Had previously to that, he was at Clemson. He's obviously a pro. Played for a number of years in the NFL. Very good player at Clemson. It sounds like he hit it off hit a home run in the interview process. Just what are your overall thoughts on making a hire like this, especially with a guy who doesn't have that kind of track record?
Right. So obviously there was a lot of smoke around Jamarcus Shepard, the wide receiver coach for Purdue. Now he's the wide receiver coach at Washington. And so, there was a lot of talk about how well he did in his interview. Right. And I think it's a good, it's good to think about, what does that mean? Right. Like, what does it mean to knock out the interview to the point where it's like he was able to overcome the experience and the kind of the bona fides of someone like Jamarcus Shepard, because I think everyone kind of assumed going into that process that Shepard was going to be the guy. And they did Shepard first, and then they interviewed Stuckey, and Stuckey was able to overcome, the obstacles of his experience. And obviously, it was reported by our Sports Daily that, he was highly recommended by Dave Aranda, his previous head coach at Baylor. He was highly recommended by Dabo Swinney. That's the kind of thing that gets you in the door, right? That's the kind of thing that gets you to the interview process. And so for him then to take that opportunity and parlay that into not just being like, okay, like he's actually under serious consideration, but being the pick. It had to have been so much about his vision for, recruiting, his vision for the way that he wants to coach receivers, his understanding of the game, right? Because you have to think, Tommy Rees and Marcus Freeman, whoever else was involved, like they had to have been very hard on him during the interview process, because it's like there's so much that they need to find out.
They're not just asking him and just connecting with this personality. Like they're, maybe hypothetically going up on the whiteboard or whatever they're using, but they're talking X's and O's. They're talking about Notre Dame scheme. They're talking about his familiarity with things. They need to know all of that, because it can't just be like, man, this guy, wow, what a great guy. Like it doesn't work like that, right?
Yeah, there's like it can't just be, oh, like he blew us away with his personality. Like it can't just be that. It has to be more than that. And so for him to again overcome what type of coach Jamarcus Shepard is, for him to do that, it had to have been very impressive. It had to have been extensive. It had to have been convincing. And people talk about how he could translate as a recruiter and that sort of thing. Well, if you can sell yourself that well to Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees and the people in charge at Notre Dame, if you can sell yourself that well to being the choice for this receiver position, where, he has a lot that he has to overcome right now. He's short numbers for the spring. They are short numbers. And, we'll get into it, the recruiting side of it. They don't have, there's Carnell Tate right now, who they're kind of in, I don't want to say in the lead for, but they're in
a contender for
with Ohio State, right? It's them in Ohio State. Other than that,
he's running behind.
He's running behind on everyone. And so he has a big job. And so there's a lot of questions there. So for him to, convince them that, hey, I'm the guy that you need to go with, that's a very it's a very big deal. And obviously it just goes to show how impressed they were with him.
Yeah, and I think that matters a lot of how they think he's going to connect as a recruiter and how he's going to be able to sell Notre Dame because, like you said, it's coming from behind with a lot of guys, and certainly Marcus Freeman is going to be involved with a lot of those guys too because he knows. I mean, there is no more important position in 2023 recruiting than wide receiver, maybe quarterback, right? Like those are the top two easily, right? So. Because they don't just need quality, they need quantity, right? They got to sign at least 4 guys, at least, that's just the way it is. Because even if you think about, wow, Notre Dame was fortunate to get, Braden Lindsey's coming back, Avery Davis coming back, Joe Wilkins coming back. I mean, I don't know if they didn't really, to be honest, they don't have NFL options in terms of like those guys are going to get picked. But at the same time, they could have looked to go somewhere else and try to get playing time somewhere else or do something else if they wanted to. So it was big that they got him back, but none of those guys are going to be back for another year after. So, the way you can look at it from there is Notre Dame is going to have, only 5 scholarship receivers. So, I mean, that's going to be a problem like after this year. So yeah, they can need to sign at least 4. And obviously there's still portal stuff, and we'll get into that a little bit later as we talk about kind of wide receiver recruiting and how kind of things are going. But it's just an absolutely like, I think when you look at always when there's a new coach and just in any job, really, when there's someone who's hiring people for the first time, you're going to get a little bit of leeway. Like Brian Kelly, when his first staff at Notre Dame, didn't take long. He had to realize that they had to make some changes there. And he had been a coach for many, many years before that, head coach for many, many years. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't work out with a lot of those guys and how it kind of developed there. And then those changes he made kind of helped propel Notre Dame to that first run at a national championship. Right. So that's part of it for sure. But with this particular hire, it has to be right. They have to, have hit a proverbial home run for this spot, or else it could go really, really bad. And the next guy is going to inherit a bad spot. So, it's important.
Right. It's interesting too, because I would say the most sure thing of the hires they've made so far is Harry Heastand on the offensive line. And he's the one who has the most like stocked situation. And because, you have Blake Fisher and you have
4 starters coming back.
Yeah.
And they got
Jared
young
Patterson,
talent coming up. Yeah.
Young talent. Like the last 2 recruiting classes are stacked and there's a ton of depth there. Even if they had nothing else, like
they should be in a really good spot for 3 years. Yeah.
And he's the most known commodity. And on the flip side, the least known commodity is Stuckey, and he has the most work to do. So it just kind of underscores like this has to work out for Notre Dame for sure.
We'll stay on the offense and we'll talk about Lance Taylor. Obviously they got to replace him. We'll get into some, potential candidates in a second, but Lance Taylor, it's a big loss, right? It's a big loss, but not unexpected because, he's trying to be a head coach one day. No one or very few programs are going to hire a guy who's just the running back coach. And no matter what, if he's a run game corner, everybody knows, like, even if he does play a big part in designing the running game, that is not like, look at Ohio State's got like 7 guys that have like associate head coach, run game coordinator, this game, like it's titles, right? So, and people don't care about that. They care about the guy calling the plays. So hopefully he gets a chance to call the plays and has success at Louisville and then could lead somewhere else for him. Or maybe he does well. And if Tommy Rees gets a head coaching job, Lance Taylor could come back to Notre Dame.
He could be the guy. And it's interesting. It just thought of this right now. It's interesting to me how, the idea behind Tony Alford leaving was he didn't feel like he had the opportunity to move up at Notre Dame. He felt like he was going to be stagnant. Went to Ohio State, and he's still in that position. He's still the running back coach. And Lance Taylor's been here for a couple of years, and now he's the one who got the Power 5 job at Louisville.
Well, even Autry Denson got a head. I mean, it's a lower level, but he got a head job, right? I don't think Tony Alford's ever going to be a head coach anywhere. His alma mater, Colorado State, which is obviously it's a group of five. They passed over him twice, and the first time I think that he had a chance, but apparently, it's famously he had one of the worst interviews. So it's like he's thought opposite Chauncey Stuckey, I guess, in that situation. It didn't work out that well, but and I think he's really kind of stuck there. I mean, he's obviously paid well. I mean, you can land any back they want pretty much. He's going to get to coach Travion Henderson for another couple of years. That's going to be pretty good. And he's in a good. He's got a good job. He's got a good job.
He's in a good spot. It's okay.
So we know he's not going to be one of after he got another raise and he turned down LSU as well, and he's not going to be one of the guys. We'll kind of see, because I was suspecting we were going to hear a little bit more about some other names maybe yesterday or today, but we haven't yet. But I'm sure that coming down the pipe, there's definitely going to be some more names that pop up. But I think there's going to be a lot of guys who want the job, or at least that they will have a chance to talk to, see if they're interested. Larry Porter from North Carolina, and he's coached everywhere and been like a dynamite recruiter. I don't know if he's really necessarily like a Notre Dame fit, but I think it's at least a guy you talk to and kind of see what's going on there. Gary Brown, who coached with the NFL, was the Dallas Cowboys for years and years. He is at Wisconsin now. Wisconsin, everybody knows that's a stepping stone job. That's where, you kind of go to like get somewhere else because they don't pay their assistants that well. Right. Which is why a lot of guys end up moving on from there. And, that's why the guy at Kentucky, John Settle, he used to be the guy at Wisconsin. He was the guy who coached Jonathan Taylor, all that. There's Lou Ayani, the guy at Northwestern, and that name's been thrown out there. He was at Iowa State before that with Matt Campbell, did a really heck of a job, at Toledo, and they're, help find and develop Kareem Hunt. Same thing with David Montgomery. Like, those guys were not high profile guys. And that's one thing that Lance Taylor, I thought, did a really good job, especially with Logan Diggs, Audric Estime, kind of evaluating those guys and thinking they're better than their ranking. And right now it looks like they're going to be. So he's an intriguing name. Out of just those names or anybody else, is there anybody that you say that, man, would be an exciting hire for Notre Dame?
I think the Northwestern coach, that's intriguing to me, just because of, he's done it at some smaller schools, but he's done it at different schools too, right? So he did it with the Iowa State running back. He did it at Northwestern. Who was the third name that you? Lou Ayani.
Larry Porter or Gary Brown or John Settle?
No. The players that he coached.
Oh, Kareem Hunt.
Kareem Hunt. That was it. So that was was it Toledo?
That was at Toledo, yeah.
That was at Toledo, and he was at Iowa State. So he's done it at multiple places, right? Like, to me, that's indicative of like, I'm a good coach, right? It's not that he was in any one system somewhere. He, like if you latch on to like the Wisconsin kind of running game, right? And it's like, well, is that the running back coach, or is that, the system that Wisconsin's running? But when he's at different schools, I think that's a big deal. I think Dalen McCullough.
Yeah, that's another name too.
At
yeah.
Iowa. He kind of, or Indiana, sorry.
Yeah.
He kind of excites me just because I know, he was out in LA, I believe, with USC. And he got another running back out there. He was, I think, maybe Jordan Howard with Indiana. So was that before his time?
Flip Marquis Step at USC, coach with the Chiefs. They won 2 Super Bowls there, right. So he's got that. But it didn't turn out that well. But he landed Samson James at Indiana. He's got a couple sons that are stud recruits that are basically going to Indiana because he's there.
Yeah.
So I mean, maybe that's just like the added bonus of
Yeah. So he was one that intrigued me quite a bit. And I've heard more than a few times, like over the last, I don't know, few years that running back coach is the easiest position to coach, and it's more of a recruiting position, that sort of thing. I think something that we take for granted from a coaching standpoint with Lance Taylor is how well the backs picked up pass blocking, because especially in the bowl game, right? When you got Kyron, he obviously he coached Kyron, right? And Kyron was a great.
Well, Tyree has developed a lot. Yeah,
Tyree has developed a lot. I think Logan Diggs, right, for just being on campus for a short time, he was good. Like, I don't remember him having like a bunch of busts or anything. I think technique wise, he was pretty good. So there's that part of it, right? Like, sometimes you can't make a running back.
Some guys are just naturally, they got it.
Sometimes they do, but like when in
terms of you get the ball in their hands, they have a natural instinct. They have just the natural physical abilities that can make them great. And there's other parts of it. It's not just like you're just throwing a guy the ball and saying, go do your thing, but there's some guys who have that extra that it's not as hard for them, right? Like Kyron Williams, there is something unique about his balance and his way that he fights through contact, is always falling forward. There's something unique about that is, I would say, some of the best stuff about him is stuff that's not coached, but picking up the blitz and like playing with technique. He's got a little bit of that inside, but a lot of that is technique and stuff too, and knowing who to pick up and doing that. And I mean, he's just like crunching 260-pound dudes like that, and he's 195 pounds. Like, that's pretty unique. And you don't do that. I don't care how strong or how tough you are. You're not doing that without technique and good coaching. So, Lance Taylor, that will definitely be missed. So you hope that all of those kind of pieces are there with it. I do wonder. I mean, it's funny. I wonder, because a lot of these guys that they're going after have other titles too, right? And there's titles again, but it's important because titles mean money. And so what are you going to do with those titles? And what are you going to do with like recruiting coordinator, right? Is there going to be a guy who is going to be associate head coach, right? Run game coordinator, pass game coordinator. Like, is there going to be any of that? Like, that'll be interesting to kind of see what they do with that. My guess, they wouldn't have all of those things right now because they want to be able to dangle those later to promote guys from within, to keep them and just give them more money. And that's also the way that they tell the school, like, we need to keep this guy. We're going to give him a new title, and we're going to give him this too. Right. So we'll see what happens there. But I think probably the biggest move, Mike Elston leaving, which was, I mean, surprising because, he had said he was going to stay and for his family and he talked a lot about that, and I think it was completely genuine. I don't want to say it was disingenuous. It was completely genuine. That is why he decided to stay. But and Mike and I talked about this on Power Hour earlier in the week. He's been looking for a way out for a while. I mean, you can go back to early BK days where he was like, thought about like maybe like going to Oklahoma, and he was, he definitely wanted the Purdue defensive coordinator job last year, didn't get it. He's wanted to try to be maybe a head coach in the MAC, interviewed for that thing. It didn't work out for him. And it might not ever. He might just be a defensive line coach, and a good one for the rest of the time. We'll see what happens. But I think it's kind of like the perfect storm of like, Michigan came open. That was something that he probably always would have taken if he was there. And I mean, it's a new head coach. He got passed over again. I mean, he's tried to be defense coordinator in Notre Dame every single time it's been open. So that means Van Gorder, Elko, Lee, Freeman, all these guys, whoever the next guy is, like all those times. So it makes sense. And
it's like, he's had two auditions too.
Yes.
So it's not like, so like for him, you could
more than a lot of guys.
Right. So he's had two auditions with Notre Dame. Neither one, obviously the one in 2016, that was tough just because
personnel wise and all that.
Personnel wise, and there was so much
going
on
on with the program. Job with it,
right?
To be honest.
But this one was a big one. and it didn't work out,
Yeah.
obviously. And so
Go back and check our breakdown of that, and you'll kind of hear why it was pretty disastrous, to be honest. Yeah.
So it's tough. And so I think, everyone pointed to his comments when he was staying, when he didn't go with BK. And obviously, it's that old thing, right? Like, things are true in the moment, but then circumstances change. And if something else makes sense, and you feel like, almost like Tony Alford, right? And I don't want to compare the two situations because the dynamics might be completely different. But the point is like, Mike Elston, I feel like he needs a roll of the dice a little bit. I think he feels like he needed to just to change the scenery. Obviously, he knows Michigan very well. It's not like he's taken a step down in terms of prestige of a job, right? Notre Dame and Michigan, like, they're equal, or at least comparable. In what, the prestige of the two programs. So it's like, and he's not Marcus Freeman's guy.
Yeah.
Like he is with what he was with BK. Right. So I think
it's you don't know what is going to happen with him long term. And he's got to look out for his family too. And in other ways,
future, right? And his own goals and everything.
It made sense.
Right. And look, Marcus Freeman clearly was ready. Right. He clearly had people in mind. He moved on to Al Washington very quickly.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously that worked out extremely well, because, they hired Jim Knowles at the Oklahoma State defense coordinator, and he was going to coach linebackers, and they weren't going to, bring him on to be, they weren't going to fire Larry Johnson as defensive line coach. So, I think it worked out perfectly. And, I think, Florida certainly was interested in him at defensive line coach. He's, I think, Georgia was trying to get him at outside linebackers, which I think for most people, they think, oh, that means he's linebacker. That's like an edge guy in Georgia's defense. So it would be something, at least a little something similar to what he'd be doing at Notre Dame. He obviously he was the defensive lineman at Boston College for 3 years, 3-year starter there. Our 3-year starter was, his whole career there. But, coached defensive line, but also coached linebacker, coached running backs, I think 3 years at Boston College too. So he's coached all around. Hasn't coached defensive line since 2017, with Cincinnati, with Marcus Freeman, Luke Fickell's staff. So there's that familiarity there. But I think really what it comes down to is, one, this is a guy that other people wanted. And so, I mean, it's good in that way. Like, I mean, you want a big battle to get a guy like this. So it's kind of like Marcus Freeman's first big win, really, on a guy who was like a free agent coach. And he is just a lights out recruiter. He's going to, I think immediately you think like Keon Keeley and, Brent Vernon, like those guys are excited about him being the coach. That's huge. Because you got to keep those guys in the class. You got to be able to get these other guys. And I think this is going to be the best defensive line class Notre Dame signed in a long time. And obviously you give credit to Mike Elston for starting it, because certainly Keeley was like, Mike Elston was his guy. So that was definitely like made a big impact with him. At the same time, Al Washington just put it up next to Mike Elston when he was at Michigan, when he was at Ohio State. It's not close as a recruiter. He's going to recruit better than Mike Elston. I don't think they're going to be taking as many projects. Certainly Elston kind of, I almost say he had a soft spot for some of the project guys that he liked, and I don't think they're going to do that. So I think it's got incredibly high upside.
Right. And I think that, I had posted a clip of you talking about Al Washington on Power Hour with Mike, or maybe it was
I was another YouTube live from
the other YouTube live, right? So you were talking with Mike about that, and you had kind of made reference to, getting Keon Keeley back in the class, and we clarified later it was just like getting him back solid. And I think the point though is that Keon Keeley is a 5-star defensive end. That is, I mean, those guys are so heavily coveted in college football, right? Especially someone with his dimensions, right? Like 6'5", 240, 250, 30, whatever he is, like speed around the edge. Like those guys are killers in the game of football. So teams are going to go after them, and they're going to go after him in the way that, like, we always talk about big boy recruiting. That's big boy recruiting. And the thing with Al Washington is he's used to that, right? He's used to pulling in 5 stars to Ohio State. And while, he's responsible for the state of Ohio, and, obviously that is, he has an advantage there. He's used to national programs. And when I say national, I'm talking about Alabama. I'm talking about Georgia. I'm talking about Florida, right? Clemson. All the top schools are coming after the guys that they sign. And he's used to that, and he knows how to win those battles.
Yeah.
So that's where the advantage is. I don't know that a ton of Notre Dame staff, because, of the way Brian Kelly did things, I don't know that a ton of Notre Dame staff, before last season.
I'm just going to tell you, Mike Elston didn't have a lot of those battles. He coached at Notre Dame for 12 years. He didn't have a lot of those battles, because even when early on, if you look at, say, Stephon Tuitt, like it was less position-based recruiting at that time, and it was more like regional, and like Chuck Martin was the dude in that recruitment. Like that was the thing, and it was a big thing. So it wasn't like he was like, I got to go play for Mike Elston. This is the big reason. Like it was just a bit different then. And now it is much more about position coach and all that. So I think that is a great point, because it's big boy recruiting. And like, I think one thing people, maybe just like average Notre Dame fan, doesn't understand is that even for some of the guys, so like Blake Fisher, like they might not have known about it, but like Georgia and Alabama and all those schools, they wanted that dude like till the end. They were still trying to get in, right? And like if things were going bad, he might have looked, right? So that's a battle that they had to win and they had to navigate. And I mean, you give Jeff Coyne a lot of credit for navigating that at the time. So there's going to be situations like that, and you want more Blake Fishers, right? You want more Blake Fishers. So that, I think that's super important, and it's a great point. Obviously the next hire, it might be the running back coach, but if it's, the one everyone's waiting on is the defensive coordinator hire. And it looked like at one point last week that Jim Heacock, the Iowa State defensive coordinator, was at least a favorite to get it.
I mean, it got to that point where it was decision time for him and for Notre Dame and everything.
Yeah. And, he's obviously not going to be the defensive coordinator. And if he was the guy, then it was going to be, I think, that was someone that you could probably, I mean, he's had over 20 years of being a defensive coordinator. He was a head coach at Youngstown State. I mean, he's got like over 30 years of college coaching. He's going to be able to control that defense and everything there. But I can understand, especially based on how the Fiesta Bowl went, Marcus Freeman is going to want a say, and he's going to want to be similar to what Nick Saban is, what Mel Tucker does, what Kirby Smart does, right? Like where they have guys that they run the defense, but I mean, if you think Nick Saban isn't heavily involved, like he is very heavily involved, right? It's a pro analogy too, but Bill Belichick is very heavily involved in every facet, but like definitely on the defensive side of the ball, right? And it's not like when Brian Flores is the defense coordinator, he wasn't the coordinator, but Bill Belichick still has heavy oversight over that. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's probably going to happen. That's what it sounds like with Marcus Freeman, is at least what, our guy, Matt Freeman, reported. So, what do you think about that? I mean, I think that's a good idea, but it may limit the scope of that. And based on that, do you think better to get a veteran guy, so maybe he doesn't have to worry as much? Go a Derek Mason route, obviously, who's been very successful, just at Auburn right now, was very successful. He was a head coach at Vandy and very successful at Stanford. Or, you go the younger route, and there's a lot of guys that you could go with that thing with. It isn't that dissimilar from, Luke Fickell, another defensive guy, having Marcus Freeman and then Mike Tressel. Right. And it's that same kind of thing. Right. So, I guess that would be the other way. Like, which way direction do you think they should go?
Right. So I think that it's probably better for the defense that he does that, just because I don't know that they'll hire a defensive coordinator who's better at coordinating than Marcus Freeman himself. So it's like, for him to take a step back away, to step away from calling the defense and being involved in the defense, it feels like a loss, because that's his great quality, right? That's why we were so excited last year when he came in. But there is the risk, and I think it puts a ton of pressure on Tommy Rees then, because if Marcus Freeman is involved in the defense in terms of, game plan and even game day calling, right? Well, he's got to make adjustments now during the game. Well, there's another whole other side of the ball that, is under his purview too. Right. And so if he's worried about how do we adjust to what the offense is doing against us, and we need to make fixes here, we need to make adjustments here, well, then he's not really paying attention to game flow. And that affects, how you manage the game, from a play calling perspective, end of half, fourth down decisions, that sort of thing, player personnel, all those things. Right. And that's part of being a head coach, where like, that's your responsibility now, yeah. Right? Like, just because you say I'm in charge of the defense doesn't mean you're not responsible. You're the one answering the questions at the end of the game. So, and this is where the loss of Lance Taylor kind of makes a big difference in terms of who they bring in at running back, because if that's the case, and Tommy Rees is now more in charge of the offense, well, who's the sounding board for the offense then on the sideline during games? Because Rees is up in the booth and McNulty is next to him. So those two guys are often working in tandem upstairs. If you have someone like Lance Taylor, who's clearly capable of, being a play caller, right? It's because Louisville just brought him in to call plays. Well, then he can be kind of like a soundboard for the offense when they come off the field, right? Where it's like, obviously the quarterback gets on the phone and talks to Rees, but what about the running backs? What about the receivers? That's not like a Harry Heastand thing, right? I don't see Harry Heastand being the guy that.
No, he's focused on his guys, and he's
not going to go talk to the backs. He's not going to talk to receivers. He's not going to do all those things. Chauncey Stuckey, right? Only had 1 year wide receiver. Like,
probably not going to be.
Yeah. That's not going to be him. So who is it going to be then, right? And so one thing they could do is they could send McNulty down to the field, right? Maybe Rees is ready to kind of be up there with like a GA or someone like that, and McNulty can go down and be the sounding board for the offense. But it brings into a whole different kind of variable for the whole team, right? So it's not just who do I get at defensive coordinator. It's okay, yeah, I'm going to make this move. I'm going to be more involved with the defense on a game during the game. What does it mean for the whole team? So to answer the question of, what they need to get or what kind of coach, I do think they need someone who is more experienced, who has not just, who has not just been, and this is where I guess I'm probably going to make a case for Derek Mason a little bit, because he's been a head coach as well. It's not just that he's the defensive coordinator, but he has experience running his own ship. So, and making his own adjustments, right? And it has to be someone that Marcus is. So Marcus Freeman says, I'm involved with the defense, but I trust this person to be making in-game adjustments while I'm focused on other aspects of the team. Yeah. So just for example, like someone like Doug Belk, right? Younger guy, hasn't been calling his
Houston
own
defense coordinator for those.
Houston defensive coordinator, hasn't been calling his own defense for a long time.
Yeah. 1 year.
Is 1 year, younger guy, right? So it's almost like the Marcus Freeman will be the alpha in that situation. I mean, he's the alpha anyway, but just from the defensive coordinator point of view, right? Is Belk ready to be in charge of the total defense while Freeman has his mind occupied in another place? I don't know that that's true, right? And I don't know if that's the best situation for the whole team. Whereas it might be better for the defense itself with Freeman and Belk, right? Because if you just look at it, just look at the defense, Freeman and Belk, like I kind of like that combo. But does that work for the entire operation? And that's obviously it's important now, like we talked about before.
You know what? I've originally, I wrote about it last week that I thought it was a good idea to get a veteran guy in there. But I mean, I'll say that, like Jerry Orbach and Dirty Dancing, when I'm wrong, I say I'm wrong. And I've been thinking about it, and I look at Saban, and I look at Smart, and the two guys were just in the national championship game, two defensive coaches in the national championship game, and I look at their coordinators. Pete Golding is the defensive coordinator for Alabama, and Dan Lanning, who was the defensive coordinator for Georgia, now took the Oregon job. And those guys did not have that experience, or not a lot, right? When they were promoted with those jobs, much like a Clark Lee, right? And much like a Doug Belk, right? And I'm not saying Doug Belk should be the guy or whatnot, or Joe Rossi from Minnesota who's only been for 3 years or whatnot, right? But I'm just saying, like, not in a particular guy, but I do think there is something, you could still hit gold with that. And I think you don't want to bring in someone who's, I think previously I'd say, I'm all for getting a veteran guy and that guy doing it, but you don't want to have a thing. You don't want to hire somebody who's set in their way and is at odds with what Freeman wants to do on defense. And chances are, if you bring in a young guy, that young guy who has a few years experience is more likely to meld with Freeman, unless it was somebody. Heacock could have made sense because they were on staff together twice, right? So that, to me, that made a lot of sense, because it's like, oh, well, Heacock can run the show, but he'll listen to Marcus because they have this previous relationship and all that. And now with that, like Derek Mason, I mean, I have no idea if he would get along great with him or not, but you definitely don't want to have a situation where you're like, I don't know how this is going to be, right? Where, I mean, one thing we know, Derek Mason has a strong personality, right?
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. I'm just
saying,
he
was a head coach.
Yeah. And I mean, I personally like his personality, but I'm just saying that, that part of it is important too. So, I do think that I have, as I've thought about it more, I can definitely see that part of it and that working out better. And also, I think when it always comes down to it, where Notre Dame is missing the most is they need players. They need better players, right? And so, I mean, they just lights out recruiting on linebacker, and they got in 2022 class, and they got Drake Bowen in 2023. So whoever is the linebackers coach is going to inherit a pretty good situation. But and if that guy's the DC as well or whatever, but to have somebody else too who was like a great recruiter, or like at least like a very hardworking recruiter. Not to say that Heacock wouldn't be or Derek Mason wouldn't be, but I mean, guys who have been around more are just typically like you always say, recruiting is a young man's game. Mm-hmm. And those guys usually are the guys who are doing it the best. So I don't know. I'm really interested to kind of see where they go with it, because I think it's like it's obviously going to be a critical hire. It's probably easily the most critical hire that he's had to make. We talked with that and receiver coach. That's why we said Stuckey is going to be important. I think those are the two most important hires. So it's going to be interesting to watch both those and see how both those go.
Right. And because like we just said, like it sets up kind of the whole team, you know. And like while we were talking, or while you were talking, I'm listening, I'm thinking about it more. Like, I think you get the best coach, you get the best fit, and then you figure it out, right?
Yeah.
Because what you don't want is to kind of shoehorn someone in. Like, I'm just going to say Mason just as a shorthand to make.
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
But you don't want to shoehorn in someone like Mason because of the experience. And you say, I don't know how much we fit, but it's like we need some experience because of XYZ. Like, no, get the best coach, get the person that best fits the situation, best fits the staff, best fits what you're looking for. And then, okay, how do we make this work? I want to get the best guys. And honestly, I think that's probably what they did with Stuckey.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, on paper, you need to go in another direction. But, you know, the process is the process. You go through your, you know, the interview process, and you talk to everybody and you say, he's the best guy. We need to make it work. And we're going to make it work. So, you know, if that's what they're doing at defensive coordinator, then okay, at least it's consistent.
Yeah. And last topic I wanted to hit on is wide receiver, just in general, like in, you know, recruiting. But I'll also mention, if anyone has any questions, you know, throw some questions in there now, so then we can see them, and maybe we'll hit like a few of them if we get a chance at the end.
Yeah.
But after we talk about this, because I don't want to ask right at the end and we don't get anything, and then right. So, so 2022 recruiting, everybody knows what went down with CJ Williams. Unfortunately, you know, as expected, he's a stud. So he's going to be very good for USC, probably start for them. I think based on what they have right there. And then, I mean, I have no idea if Morin Walker is going to be good or not, to be honest. And I think if he went to Notre Dame, he would have flaked out anyways. But, you know, the point is they lost those two guys. They only signed one, Tobias Merther, who also looks like he's going to be a stud, and that's great. But, I mean, they're short numbers. And they offered two guys, Caleb Douglas from Texas, Justice Lowe from Oregon. Both guys, initial interests, right? But then as you kind of go into further, you find out Justice Lowe, well, he doesn't have the courses to be able to get in, so that's going to be a thing. And then boom, he commits to Oregon. And Caleb Douglas doesn't look like he's going to be a fit. So now Notre Dame really doesn't have time to kind of evaluate anybody else. There really isn't anybody else out there just based on how the December signing period goes.
2 weeks.
So, I mean, maybe they can get one guy or something. Like, I mean, crazier things have happened. I mean, that 2017 class, they just were like, up until like the last day, they were just offering dudes. So maybe they can do something like that. Obviously, there's way more guys you could go for, and guys who are committed to other schools you could offer. Like, people forget Jeremiah Wosu-Koromoa in this current thing would have played for Virginia, because he would have signed early and he would have played for Virginia, and Notre Dame wouldn't have been able to steal him. And that obviously would have sucked because he was a Butkus winner and was an all-around stud. But, you know, so in this situation, they don't have a lot of guys there. So, and even when you look at it, should Notre Dame just pass on 2020? I know they need numbers, right? But if you're going to get a guy that is going to be Devin Apui, who's going to show up and then he's like, man, this isn't for me, and he's out.
Right.
Or you get a guy and you're like, I'm not sure about this guy, but we've got to take a chance. And you're like, man, this guy's never going to play here. And then he's out, or he sticks around and takes a scholarship, whatever, right? Like, that's not going to be good either. So I think personally that they should, whether it's now or in the spring, they should just scour the portal. And I know it's tough. It's almost impossible to find somebody who's A, good enough to play at Notre Dame, and B, going to get into Notre Dame as definitely as a regular transfer, but as a grad transfer as well. So, I mean, I still think that's kind of the way they got to go in terms of just filling numbers now and then going heavy in 2023. But I don't know. What do you think? Should they try to still get somebody else in 2023?
I mean, if someone comes up and you feel like they can make it, you make a run, right? Like, I don't think that you need to close the door, but just logically speaking, what are the chances of that? right? Like, what are the chances of someone who can come in and like actually be an impact player, at least down the line? Like, what are the chances of them being of that happening? Right? I just don't feel like they're very good.
Not very good.
They're not very
even
good.
If for even Caleb Douglas and Justice Lowe, who I think are actually pretty good, the chances of them being great players or even starters, is less so than a lot of other guys, right?
Yeah.
So, you just don't like. I remember like Chris Olave was a guy who blew up as a senior. A little bit earlier though, it was like in like late October. People had made it pretty obvious that he was going to be, and then he ended up going to Ohio State and obviously having a great career. But there's not a lot of those guys. There's not a lot out there. So,
so I think you do have to hit the portal if it comes up, right? Because at this point, the fact of the matter is they're not going to have a ton of bodies for the spring. That is what it is.
Yeah.
Right. So you just have to hope that someone that, you feel like is a fit and feel like can make a difference. Right. Hopefully they hit the portal between now and, June or whatever. Cause that's when I think, when did they get, they got K Madden? What was it? May or June?
Yes. It was like, it was late. It was May because he had to be there for June or whatever. But
right. So it was later. It was much later.
It was after the spring.
Nick McLeod as well.
Another guy, right? Yeah, there's going to be guys, and like even if you think about Everett Golson when he transferred out from Notre Dame, that was after the spring. He practiced with Malik Zaire. Remember that was like the spring battle, and they were like having fun in the spring game, and then everyone's like, "Oh wow, we'll see what happens here in the fall." And then boom, he was out, right? So. Yeah, it can happen like that. So I could easily see it. I think that's probably the best way. And also too, like Matt Freeman had suggested with quarterback too. I do think, they look at what is going on with quarterback and they reevaluate after the spring because maybe they do have to look at somebody, even if it's just like a veteran backup just there, based on what they have. Like, I think that's important too. So, there could be, obviously there's some issues there and it would almost 100% have to be a grad transfer at that point.
And here's the problem though, is I don't want to say the problem. It's just kind of the situation where you need a guy to come in. You need someone to come in and willing, like let's say a grad transfer, right? A grad transfer wants to play. Like that's the point. Right, is they want to come in and they want to get a ton of snaps. Well, the issue with that is Notre Dame is returning, Lorenzo Styles, we know he's going to play. Braden Lindsey, we know he'll play. Avery Davis, we know he'll play. And then you have Colsey, who we know Notre Dame likes, and we know he'll play. Like they're short.
Everybody who's back is but not quality.
Short in numbers, not in quality, and that's kind of the pickle that they're in, is that they have guys they want to play. They just need more of them.
Yeah.
Well, a grad transfer doesn't want to come in and play 20 snaps.
Yeah. Well, there might be somebody who wants to come in. They want to have a chance to maybe compete for the playoff. Maybe they wanted to get a degree. Maybe they want to get into coaching and they see this is the best way to get connections there. So there is that possibility, but like, if you're looking for somebody who's coming in,
Williams,
no.
It's not someone who's like,
you're not going to
guy's going to step in and be our X.
Yeah, for sure. No one in the portal that they're going to get is going to be a guy who's going to start for them.
Right. So I just want to highlight a couple comments that we've seen. David Flores says if they don't land another wide receiver, they should move JoJo Johnson to wide receiver, possibly have a talk with Watts, possibly coming back. And Michael Parks had a similar comment about move Xavier Watts back to receiver. What are your thoughts on, I guess, those?
This is a hell no from me for both of these.
All right.
And sorry, no offense to Michael. And
no.
I don't mean offense to them, but I'm saying for Xavier Watts, he's gone. He's leaving. He is not. If you're saying, oh, we just said that they have quality there. So Xavier Watts is not going to start at wide receiver. he's going to be third string at wide receiver at best, based on what they have coming back. So he's going to man, we really need you to just take practice reps. No, he's not going to be open to that, let alone Xavier Watts. He could have a great spring. He might start at safety. They have issues to safety. I've suggested maybe he should actually be more of the full-time rover. Yeah. And if they say wanted to move Kaiser inside to give him more of a shot to play there, and then Notre Dame could be a little bit more diverse on defense if they're playing more of a hybrid safety type there. And obviously he's shown that he could succeed on the perimeter and some of the stuff he does downhill too, right? So I don't think that is a move good for him. And because if they were loaded at safety, then I'd be like, maybe that's something, but they're not. So I don't think so. And in terms of JoJo Johnson, that one I could maybe see, because then you're like saying, oh, here's the pot of gold, the end of the rainbow to him. Do you want to play offense? Then maybe you could do that, right? But if you look at Tariq Bracy, first of all, they started training. They started first day of working out right now. Tariq Bracy doesn't know if he's coming back yet. Has not said. And as we've heard, I checked in with some people earlier who had said that no, he has not said that he doesn't know what he's going to do. So that's not a great sign. No. If that's so for him coming back, maybe he will, but it's not a great sign. So they're going to need a nickel at the very least. They're going to need more help at corner. And JoJo really, out of the freshman last year before he tore his ACL, was maybe the best freshman corner. At least made the most plays in the practices that we went to. And it, has the profile fit of a nickel. And I think could compete there at least, and, maybe a Jaden Mickey or something like that too. So, I'm not saying that he couldn't be maybe a good wide receiver. I'm just saying they might need him at corner. Yeah. So so okay, maybe Watts is a hell no, and then JoJo's more of a I don't think so. Yeah. But I don't know. I don't see it as a good move for Notre Dame's defensive backfield or for either of those guys.
Right. So David, here's the thing: is that it's kind of the same issue as a transfer would want to come in, right? Because there aren't really spots available. You're talking about coming in and being the seventh guy. So do you want JoJo to be the seventh guy at wide receiver, or do you want him to try to compete for the nickel, right? Or in an actual rotation role for the defense, whether they're in a nickel or a dime situation, right? And I think Watts is kind of similar in that, where you're talking about, I don't want a co-starter at safety because they want to play three. You always want to play more than two safeties, right? This was the big problem with Alohi and Jalen Elliott in 2018. They played 900 snaps. Don't want that. And especially you don't want that with Ramon Henderson and Brandon Joseph, right? That's too many, right? So they're going to have a rotation at safety. And I think he's at least the third safety, if not.
Well, DJ Brown, those guys are still going to play.
Oh no, for sure. But I think Watts will eventually overtake DJ Brown in terms of just reps. I think DJ Brown will absolutely play. Absolutely. He's played a lot. But it's you're talking about 35 reps a game that he could be getting. And again, this is his second season, right? Brandon Joseph's only here for a year. He could be our starting safety for Notre Dame, down the line. Whereas, you put him at receiver, they're going to bring in a bunch of guys this year. They're going to bring in 4. If they bring in a transfer, I'll bet you it's not just a 1-year thing. So, and they're going to be looking in the portal regardless, right? So they're always looking in the portal. They're always going to look to bring in numbers underneath that. So it's in a vacuum, can Xavier Watts play receiver? Maybe, right? We haven't seen it. We know that it didn't work out for him. And the numbers were short last year, and they still moved it. right? It's not like the situation at receiver was so good. I mean, look at what the bowl game. They had 4 guys.
Yeah, that was dire.
And they still moved him. So that just kind of shows. But so it's not that I don't think that he can do it. It's that we know he can play safety.
Yeah.
And we know he's a good fit there. So to me, it's like keep him at the spot where we know he can be a difference maker. We know he has a role.
And you don't want him to be like Avery Davis either, where you're just putting the guy all over the place. And
right, just because it worked out doesn't mean that's what you want.
If Avery Davis, if they had right away and when they moved him and said you're a slot, and say like you're competing with Chris Fink here, and this is what is going to happen. I mean, he might have overtaken Chris Fink if that was the case eventually. Not right away, I don't think, but eventually. And I think, maybe if obviously he's hurt and that's the reason he didn't go, but he might have had a way better shot at being in the league right now, right? Because this is a 6th year. He's a super senior, right? So, I think that I don't know. I don't see those guys being solutions to anything. I think it could be because I think arguably defensive back is, the most other area where you're like, man, we got to figure this out. And maybe in the spring they figure out and they're like, man, JoJo's not in the mix. So, okay. You're going to move, right? Or whatnot. Maybe that happens, but I don't know. I wouldn't think that. And sorry, I know Michael, you keep jumping in here, but X Watts isn't going to be the 4th receiver. He wasn't the 4th receiver when he moved. The reason why he moved is because he was like the 8th receiver. So I was a fan of him as a receiver, but he's just not going to be that. He's not that guy. Or else he would have stayed at receiver, and that would have been his thing. He was never really in the mix there. So there's no real reason to think like, oh, all of a sudden he's going to move back and do it. Like, that would have to be a pretty big sell job on their part.
All right, let's pull this up from Tom A. ESPN is confirmed as being in Columbus for game day. Without a doubt, Irish will be an underdog. In your opinion, what chances do we have of pulling an upset?
I think there's a chance. I think what Michigan did to them laid a blueprint, because the way Oregon beat them at the beginning of the year, they were a different team at the end of the year, especially on offense. And anyone who watched the Rose Bowl, that offense is nasty. The receivers are going to be great. That's going to be a problem. And I think when you look at that, for Notre Dame to pull off the upset, they'll either have to outscore them, and it's going to have to be a shootout, and you're going to have to outscore them, because I don't think Notre Dame matches up well enough with them in the second. I don't think I know as of right now. Maybe it'll change, but as of right now, I would say they don't. Or they have to do the Michigan thing, and what Michigan did was dominated them up front. Not just been better than them, and I think Notre Dame was going to have an edge on them up front, but they have to dominate them. So they ran for 7 yards per carry. They held them to 2.4 yards per carry, right? So I think that, I think where it is with where they have to be able to get a pass rush on them all day too. And in that game too, I wrote about this in 6 Thoughts about it. They had like 7% pressure rate in that game. Mm-hmm. So that means like Foskey has to go off. That means Admiral brothers have to go off. Jordan Battelle, like Riley Mills, all those guys need to be in his face all game, and they got to hit him, and they got to slow him down that way. So that's the kind of recipe for it. But also remember, it snowed that day. It's not going to snow in September in Columbus. No. So that is another part of it. But I think it's going to be tough for them to pull it off. But I think that's the kind of recipe. And the good news is, I think because it's the first game, you got months to get ready for this and prepare. And man, I think it's gonna be a fun game, and I do think no matter what, whatever, might come back to bite me, but I think it'll be close.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I had that Brendan McAlinden from One Foot Down. He had a stat. I don't know that this was months ago or a month ago, like leading into the bowl season, where like Ohio State has gone an insane amount of time without losing when they score 30 plus points a game.
Yeah.
So that's the recipe, basically, is where you need to keep the points down on them somehow, right? They scored 27 against Michigan and lost. Scored 24 against Oregon and lost, right? And in both those games, there was a lot of yards, and there were a lot of, they made their plays, right? It's not like you're going to keep them from making their plays, but you keep the points down, and that's how you do it. And I think in both of those games, you saw them get run on, and you saw them get their run game stopped to where it was just like you're one-dimensional. And luckily, the Oregon game, like that also it wasn't snowing then either. So you have to be able to run on them. You have to be physical. You have to beat them up. It's not it's easier said than done, of course, right? They rarely lose, especially at home. But you have to be more physical than them. And I think Notre Dame has a recipe for that, right? I think they have the personnel, but you have to do it. And look, you got to play great, right? You got to play really well. And so that's the thing. But they have the offensive line for it, with Foskey and Jason Adamiola coming back. Like, you do have the recipe on the defensive line. Like, you would need Foskey to like show us you're the first round pick. Like, for him, that's a showcase game if there ever was one, So you need your stars to come out. You need that, and obviously you need really good play from Buckner. But be more physical than them. Beat them up. That's how you get it done.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the recipe. Okay. Well, is there anything else here, or do you want to wrap it up? Was there any other questions? Oh, I just see like David Solomon. He's talking about Deion Colzie. I mean, we haven't seen enough of Deion Colzie to be honest. I mean, I think I'm sure there's a lot of people that are somewhat concerned because in the bowl game when they were playing, they played Austin all the time at the boundary, and they didn't really give Colzie too much run, right? So I think Colzie had some nice flashes. I mean, he had some great flashes.
I wouldn't say lack of interest. He's a freshman.
Right? No. I'm just talking about
No, but I'm just it's in the.
Oh
comment.
yeah.
So that's.
Yeah. I don't know. No, I don't think that's whatever. Yeah. Especially when someone is only playing so much time, you see one play and you blow it up to being like, this is what I mean. Maybe if we watch him 80 plays and you see most of the time, and he's doing this and doing that, right? And but I think they need him to be good though, for sure. Because if not, then that means Joe Wilkins are going to count on him, and obviously Joe Wilkins has done a few nice things here or there, but he hasn't played enough for you to count on him. And Jane Thomas heard some good things. Heard he had a good, time bowl prep and all that, but haven't seen him yet enough. So I think it's big spring. Colzie and Thomas, both those guys, they're gonna need to have big springs, because I think if you look at where Notre Dame is at, slot and X, right? They're in good shape there with the guys, at least the top guys there. So they really need to find something in the boundary. And so it's probably going to be Colzie, Thomas, Wilkins. That's, you'd like to see one of those guys really, really step up, and you get to see, I mean, the issue with Colzie, unfortunately, is that some of the other guys who kind of broke through later on the boundary, I mean, he's kind of got to do it now. Like, it's second year, he's got to do it now. It's not an issue where Claypool, year 4, and I'm not saying he'd be year 4 Claypool, but I'm just saying those guys took a while. Boykin took a while, right? Javon McKinley took a long while, right? So, and they were good players, but Colzie's got to be good right away. So,
and I think important to remember too, not an early enrollee. Styles was.
Yes, that's a good point. Very good point. Yeah, and I think that definitely helped contribute to, but to Styles kind of taking off. Although you would in camp early in the beginning of fall camp, there was a lot more buzz about Colsey than there was Styles at that time. So you never know. We'll see what happens, but I do think that there's a lot of potential at the receiver position. You just don't want to see injuries where
Right.
because like if they have those kind of injuries this year, I mean, that's going to be a problem. You don't want to be in a situation where you're going in with 4 or 5 healthy receivers in a game.
Can't have it.
And I think somebody asked about like, well, maybe Notre Dame will play like Wisconsin. I mean, Notre Dame's not going to play like Wisconsin ever, I don't think, but they will. I mean, you're going to see a lot of 12 personnel. I mean, Tactics is coming back too, so he's going to play a lot. I think Mitchell Evans get a chance to really break out and have a good year. Kevin Bauman, I mean, it was kind of like a wasted year because he got hurt and came back really late. But he had a fantastic camp last year, and I think he's a guy to watch too. And unfortunately, came wrong. I mean, he tore his ACL late in the year, but as a receiver wise, he actually makes more sense of them moving as like a big slash receiver / tight end if they were ever going to do something there. But I don't imagine he'll be ready for spring, but we'll see. Heard he gets open all the time. But I think, blocking wise, he needs some work and he's not the biggest guy. Right. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll definitely do more of these.
Yeah. It was our first live show.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. We'll definitely do more of these. I think we're obviously waiting on defensive coordinator. We're waiting on what they're going to do as running backs coach, waiting on, what might happen portal wise. And there's going to be different things that come on and obviously leading up to spring too. We'll do this again. So thanks everyone for tuning in and we'll talk to you next time.